Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. We're gonna kind of keep going with the Q&A form episodes. One, because I think you guys are finding these really helpful just via the feedback that I've been getting, and also they're like fun for me to record because it feels like I'm directly answering your questions and helping you out with things that many of you have actively shown me that you need help with. So yeah, let me know. Let me know what you want to hear on the pod. If you want, certain topics covered, please always feel free to shoot me like a DM on social media. It's just super helpful because I've been doing the pod for over 5 years now. So, having input from my listeners is something that I really value. So, this episode, I'm going to cover two questions, and they are loaded topics. So, know that again, this podcast is never a replacement for individualized advice or medical advice. It's not a replacement for working with a dietitian or working with a healthcare professional one-on-one, but these are big topics. These are topics that like I talk about with clients every single day. That can really take like a whole body of work working together to really understand and individualize. But I really want to cover it at least at the surface level on the podcast so that you can kind of see where I'm coming from and where a lot of sports dietitians are coming from when you follow me and my colleagues on social media and you hear us talking about underfueling. So the two questions and topics I'm going to cover today are: how do I know if I'm fueling enough? How do I know if I'm eating enough? Like, how you always talk about underfueling and how common it is and how to watch out for it, but like, how do I know if I'm doing a good job? I think that positive reinforcement and the feedback and the insight that we all look into when we're working with clients is really, really helpful and important to share so that you know when you're doing it right. Because social media is really good, and I'm guilty of this, by the way. Social media is really good at highlighting things you're doing wrong or could be doing differently. And sometimes that's awesome. And sometimes that's just not helpful. It's not the energy you need. We just want to be told we're doing a good job, right? Being a human's really hard. Um, so I know my colleagues and I, a lot of the times focus on like problematic things that we see in practice because we want you to be doing well and we want you to be able to use our resources to help yourself. But sometimes I think, again, we focus too much on like what you're doing wrong. So I'm going to talk a little bit in this podcast episode about how to know if you're doing it right, and if you know you're not doing it right, what we're kind of aiming for eventually when it comes to fueling enough. And then the second question is kind of more of a stream of consciousness and thoughts that I put together around just some of my thoughts on GLP-1 medications. I've been getting a lot of questions on like, Holley, what do you think about the fact that Serena Williams, huge, highly successful, incredible athlete, has come out and really kind of supported, people using GLP-1s because she has been using them and is talking a lot about that and getting a ton of media coverage. So I just figured I talked about GLP-1s a bunch in the past, and like some of my thought process on them has evolved a bit. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of an update with the context of that being a question I got a lot in August. What do you think about Serena Williams? Can you say something about Serena Williams? So I want to give some thoughts on that too. So let's start with the first question. So, how do I know if I'm eating enough? You often hear us talking about how you'll feel if you're not eating enough. So let's start there, which is typically you're tired, maybe your energy's low, and it could be any, all, or some of these symptoms. Hair loss, brittle nails, bad skin health, poor performance, you're plateauing, you're bonking, you're hitting the wall, your muscles feel sore, heavy, tired really often, kind of lost your spark, lost your oomph when it comes to training. Or maybe you're doing okay in training, but you're losing your cool or your function in your daily life. And this is something that I see really often where people are like, I'm so exhausted, I can barely go to work, but like I did my training. So that's a sign. Getting sick a lot, not having great immune function, having a lower sex drive. That's really common in all genders. In women, sometimes it is like just a lower libido in general, having difficulty with orgasm. We never talk about this stuff, right? Like, Holley, you're a dietitian. Why are you talking about sex? Because people don't like talking about this, but it's important because if it's happening to you, it can be directly related to sometimes your energy availability. And in men, sometimes it's issues with erections. So that's something too, like if that rings a bell, could be linked to fueling, is your libido and your just sexual function in general. Um, Having like a regular and lower symptom menstrual cycle, if you are a person who is menstruating or who should be menstruating, that's definitely a factor too. We may have irregular periods, whether they're missing or your cycles are really long, or maybe they're really short, or you're noticing just even differences in your symptoms around your period being a lot more intense, more cramping, more moodiness, more bloating. That can be a sign of underfueling. GI issues. So having indigestion, feeling like you're not tolerating foods anymore, kind of playing whack-a-mole with like which food sensitivity am I suffering from, those types of things, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, all of the above, some of the above. That's a huge component and kind of sign that energy availability could be an issue. Poor sleep. So sleep's not great, especially if you're having trouble where you're waking up in the middle of the night and it's hard for you to fall back asleep. That is really, really commonly linked to underfueling and like poor blood sugar regulation. Lab work. So maybe we've got some micronutrient deficiencies like low vitamin D, low vitamin B12. Maybe you're struggling with your ferritin status and your iron status, anemia. There's a lot of other labs I could talk about too, but it could be hypothyroidism, especially secondary hypothyroidism, where it's not necessarily an autoimmune condition, but we do have a sluggish thyroid. That can be a component for sure. Mental health. So obviously, nutrition can really impact how we feel mentally. It's not the only therapeutic tool we have for mental health. There are so many complexities and other tools that we can be using for mental health outside of nutrition. I think it's really important to address that. And if we are underfueled, our brain is not getting what it needs to function well. So that can really, I see a lot people who maybe have an existing mental health condition, maybe feel those symptoms a little bit more, like you're a bit more anxious or you're a bit more depressed, or you're having more intrusive thoughts, or you're having more compulsions and more behaviors, and that type of thing. So that's something to definitely keep tabs on too. Body composition changes. Some people lose weight, some people gain weight, some people stay the same, but they have a hard time putting on muscle mass, losing body fat. And there's so many more things too. Underfueling, and particularly if it's chronic and it becomes relative energy deficiency and sport syndrome, or REDS as it's called. Yeah, it has systemic effects on every body system. Central nervous system, cardiovascular system, respiratory system, immune system, endocrine system, reproductive system, digestive system, everything, bones. So recurrent injuries is a big one too, or injuries that aren't healing, especially if they are nagging soft tissue injuries or stress fractures, or bone injuries in general. These are very much indicative that maybe there's not enough nutrition on board to support a thriving athlete. So now let's talk about how to know if you are eating enough. So it's like the opposite of everything that I said. Look, being a human is hard. We're not lab rats in a vacuum. If you're a client listening to me, you're like, God, Holley, you say that all the time. It's so annoying. But it's true. It's really true. Like whenever I see research or I see influencers, even if they're really like, they have good credentials and they are like a trusted professional source, it's usually pretty easy to tell if they're not working with real people a lot one-on-one, because they're talking about people as if they were lab rats in a vacuum. Like, you will always have no external factors affecting you, or you will always feel a certain way. And that's just not true. Look, I've worked with humans one-on-one for almost a decade in my field, and humans have a lot of shit going on. Sometimes you don't get a good night's sleep because you just don't, or because your kid woke you up, or your dog woke you up, or, something outside woke you up, or you just didn't have a good night's sleep and there's no explanation. And that's okay too. Sometimes you just don't feel good on your run. And sometimes that has to do with things that you can figure out, like time in your cycle, not getting enough food, not getting enough sleep, the weather sucks, your mental health just isn't great that day. Sometimes it's just a bad day and there's no explanation and you feel great the next day. Um, so sometimes stuff happens, stuff that's within our control, stuff that's not. So when I'm working with real humans and then what I'm about to go over is how to know if you're fueling enough, know that I do not mean you should feel all of these things 100% of the time perfectly. And I've got a lot of perfectionists listening to my podcast, myself included, recovering perfectionist over here. Um, this is not like, oh my gosh, if some of this isn't happening all the time, or I do have a day every once in a while where I don't sleep. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like 75% of the time or more. Yeah, you're hitting a lot of check marks on this list and you're feeling pretty good, okay? So, not perfection, but pretty good. Solid B. So we will have good energy levels. So we feel like, yeah, sometimes I'm tired, but usually I feel pretty good and I don't feel like I need a nap. I'm not relying on caffeine. I wake up and I feel like, okay, time to do the day. You don't have to be like bursting out of bed with a ton of energy and like skipping through the house, like a princess from Disney. But if you do, that's great. And can I have what you're having? But you wake up, you're like, okay, time for Tuesday. And most of the times when it's time to go to bed, you fall asleep because you're tired, but not because you're so exhausted that thank God it's bedtime. So we should feel like we have pretty decent energy most of the time. Little bit of ebb and flow, totally normal, but we shouldn't be crashing. We should be performing well and consistently. So this is where huge breakthrough performances sometimes happen right as we're about to get injured or sick or kind of just tip the scale out of balance. And sometimes that happens and it's okay. You're a human. It's all right. You can make mistakes or we can just have things be what they are and be okay with them and then adjust. But a sign that an athlete is just doing well from like a homeostasis energy availability standpoint, i.e. they're eating enough all the time for the most part, is that they're damn consistent. They show up to their training. Yeah, some blips in the radar happen, but for the most part, they're pretty consistent. They're getting the training in. It's going to plan most of the time. Some days they feel better than others, but they're doing pretty well. And when they show up to races, as long as there's no crazy, factors like really severe weather or they're sick, they're doing pretty good. Like they're performing pretty well. They're able to progress. Sometimes they don't have the day they want, but for the most part, they're pretty consistent. That's a really good sign too, that we're eating enough like consistently over time. It's not like we had a 4-hour marathon and then we did something really dramatic and all of a sudden we had like a 3.5-hour marathon. And then the next time we had, like a 3-hour, 15-minute marathon. And then we get so sick and injured and like depleted that we can't even show up to run a race for like 5 years. You should kind of be like, okay, maybe I ran a 4-hour marathon and then I ran a 3-hour, 50-minute marathon. And then maybe it was like a 3:45. And then I kind of got stuck at a 3:45 or 3:50 for a bit. And then I had a break there. I ran like a 3:35. And then, okay, so like we're kind of looking for gradual progressions within reason, that there's not like a huge tax that you have to pay because you did too much too soon, if that makes sense. We have good immune function. You're not getting sick a lot. Look, I know a lot of you have kids or maybe work in the school system, which I call the germ jungle, or work in healthcare, which is also the germ jungle, where yeah, you're going to get sick sometimes. And it's just because you're entering your body, into the germ jungle and being like, let's see what happens every single day. Your kid brings home something from school and then they lick your face and now you have it. But we shouldn't be catching everything. And if we are catching a lot of things, it shouldn't be severe all the time. It should be like, oh, I have a little upper respiratory tract infection. My whole family got sicker than me. I healed, I moved on. Or actually they brought home something, but I didn't get it. So we should have pretty good immune function. This doesn't mean you never get sick. If that's you, that's great. Love that for you. But it should mean that you're getting sick a typical amount or less. And sometimes if you're in the germ jungle situation, it takes a bit to build up your immune system to be able to take all of that. But if you feel like you're always sick, that's a red flag for low energy availability. Good libido. We talked about this. Do you have to be like, I'm turned on all the time? No, of course, of course not. But if you're noticing changes there from your norm that are worse, that's a sign that, hey, maybe we should look at eating more. And one of the reasons why I always mention this is because one, nobody talks about it. So we should probably start talking about it more. And two, if you are not eating enough, one of the first things your body's going to take from you is your reproductive health. And whether you want to have kids or you never want to have kids, this is a problem because if we're basically making less sex hormones because we're not eating enough to give our body the supplies that it needs to make sex hormones, that means that our bone health is going to suffer, our cardiovascular health is going to suffer, our performance is eventually going to suffer because we're going to end up with cardiovascular issues and or stress fractures. And this also isn't good for our mental health long term. We can, see higher incidences of like dementia with poor sex hormone function long term, and a lot of other patterns too that are problematic. So and obviously fertility. So if you want to have kids, that's a big one. If you never want to have kids, you still want to have a good sex drive because of all of these things. It's linked to a lot of other stuff in your body because it's part of being a normal human. So solid libido most of the time, probably good in terms of eating enough. And some people are more sensitive to this than others. Same thing with the menstrual cycle topic that I'll talk about is having a regular, pretty low symptom menstrual cycle, which means your menstrual cycle is within 21 to 35 days total from start to finish. Day one being the first day of your period, the last day being the day before your period starts. And within that 21 to 35 day range, it's not varying a ton, like more than 1 or 2 days for the most part. It's pretty predictable when your cycle is going to come. And you're kind of like, oh, look, my period. You're not like, I'm exhausted. I'm a raging monster. I want to eat everything in sight. I am miserable. I'm so bloated. I can't button my pants. I have such severe cramps. I can't go to work. These things are usually a red flag that one, we got to look at some underlying condition stuff. Like, do you have endometriosis? Do you have PCOS? Do you have, a cervical or uterine issue or ovarian issue? We need to look into this more medically. And if nothing's wrong, then it could definitely be indicative of an energy availability issue because it can mean basically your body's not quite where it needs to be in terms of fuel. So it's not really making hormones in sync properly. And those slight imbalances of hormones can lead to some of these symptoms. So typically a well-fed athlete is going to be a much less symptomatic athlete when it comes to having a lower symptom period. And of course, if you do have chronic conditions, this can jazz things up for you. And this is where, you're not a lab rat in a vacuum. Some of you probably have endometriosis and you could be very well fueled and still have tough periods. And we can do stuff, other stuff for that nutritionally and medically to help you deal. But of course, if you, have an underlying condition, nutrition is one therapeutic tool, but it is not the only therapeutic tool that you should probably be using, is what I'm trying to say. Another sign that we're probably eating enough is that we have solid labs. So our micronutrient labs are looking pretty good. Like we've got good vitamin D levels. We've got solid ferritin. That's a big one with eating enough that I see. One, because if we're eating enough, then maybe our monthly bleed isn't as severe. We're not losing as much iron. And also if we're eating enough, especially carbohydrates and other mineral dense foods from different protein sources, this means that our body's not blocking iron absorption and it's absorbing it well and therefore getting into storage well. Very important. Our vitamin B12 is solid, which means that we're getting enough food to make enough stomach acid to absorb vitamin B12 from food. We're also getting adequate vitamin B12 through food or supplements if you are a plant-based athlete and that sort of thing too. Our, other labs, of course, are a moving target. You're a human. Sometimes you're going to have stuff medically with you that has nothing to do with nutrition that, maybe nutrition could be a therapeutic tool for and really help you manage it. And sometimes it can only go so far. But in particular, a lot of the times I see fueling adequately look like healthy thyroid function in someone without autoimmune disease. good nutrient stores and good like ferritin status. And again, a functioning immune system and all of that sort of thing, but understanding that you're individuals and you're not lab rats. So sometimes stuff still happens. We also have solid mental health or notice less mental health triggers. Again, nutrition is a therapeutic tool for mental health, but it's not the only therapeutic tool for mental health. But I will typically see if you're fueling adequately, for example, and you have like anxiety, you tend to have less triggers for this because your brain has enough glucose to function well. It doesn't mean you don't have anxiety anymore. For some people, it could, but for some people, it just means no, like it's just really well managed, and nutrition really helps me feel a bit more solid throughout the day, even though I'm a human and sometimes stuff still gets to me or triggers stuff, and I have other tools that I can use to deal with that. But I do tend to notice when a lot of my athletes start to fuel more adequately over many months and years, they do notice like a decrease in some of their mental health symptoms. Body composition is stable. This is another one where when you're fueling adequately consistently, so not usually when you're first trying to introduce more food and trying to fill the gap. Sometimes our body comp will change during that process, which can take months or years, just for transparency. But when we have been fueling adequately, we filled the hole, and now we're just maintenance. We're adequately fueling for, years. Our body composition is pretty stable. We don't have a hard time building muscle mass. And body fat is kind of what it is. It doesn't mean you have to be a quote unquote healthy or normal BMI. People in larger bodies and smaller bodies can absolutely be healthy and be fueling adequately. So again, weight is not the only factor that can tell us what our health status is like. So looking at all of these bullet points, these are the things that me and Erica, the team sports dietitians at Holley Nutrition, this is like what we're checking in with people. This is what we're trying to improve with people. A lot of the times athletes come to us because they've got GI issues, or they've got some hormone, related symptoms and issues, or they're injured, or they're training for a marathon and they're kind of tired, fatigued, brain fog. They're not just like, I'm coming to you because I don't think I'm feeling adequately, but I feel amazing, right? People are usually coming to us because our message, hit home with them because they have symptoms and they would like to feel better because something feels off. So these are the ways that we're kind of like checking in to see if our interventions are working over time. And sometimes when we first incorporate eating more food, stuff gets a little bit worse before it gets better, depending on the symptom and the person. But a lot of the times, some of this stuff will start to get better pretty quickly, and then other things take a little bit longer to kind of catch up, if that makes sense. So if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I feel like I hit those check marks most of the time. Like I feel pretty good. My energy is good. I'm satisfied with my performance. I don't have any GI issues. I know my injury status is great. I get vitamin, lab work done, and I know that is optimized. Sex drive is good. Periods are good. Sleep is good. You're crushing it. Good job. And I feel that I fit the bill on this most of the time. I do not always feel that has been the case though. So if you are like, well, I don't really feel like all of that's the case for me, I think I could use some help, I totally get it. That's why I do what I do. And I will tell you that it is something you can improve on and feel really freaking good in all phases of life. Knowing that health is not a destination we just achieve one day. It's a practice and some things you don't have control over, which sucks for us perfectionists to wrap our heads around, but it is true. So if you want more support with your nutrition, if you feel like some of this hit home and you're like, I don't know if I'm eating enough, or some of that kind of hit home for me and I need like more specific interventions, or I'm having a hard time like kind of mentally overcoming the idea of eating more because I have not a great relationship with food, or I've had, eating disorder stuff in the past, or it just feels overwhelming, or I don't know how to go about it, or I've got some GI issues that are kind of a barrier for me wanting to eat more, please, we'd love to help you. If you want more support, you can check out the link in the show notes to work one-on-one with us. All right, now let's get into the second topic, the controversial topic of this episode. So essentially, I just want to give some thoughts on GLP-1s and Serena Williams in particular. I feel that I'm going to toot my own horn a little bit. I feel that I have a unique perspective on this compared to maybe some of my other colleagues who just don't have the same background as me professionally. I want to come to this too with full transparency. I'm in a thin body. I've got some thin white privilege. I have never experienced being in I've experienced being in a larger body than the one that I have, but on a scale of, what's considered the thin ideal versus like what's considered a quote unquote problem via society and diet culture ideals, I have never existed in a large body. And I don't know what that's like. So I'm coming at this from that perspective personally. And I will also say my background as a professional is the first several years as a dietitian and the first several jobs that I worked in weight loss, and I worked in bariatric and weight loss surgery and medical weight loss. So I have a lot more experience than the average dietitian, especially the average sports dietitian who didn't go that route first, with working with people who are in larger bodies and working with people in larger bodies who were pursuing weight loss through a variety of different ways: lifestyle, nutrition, exercise, medication, surgery, various degrees of interventions. So I have that perspective. I've worked with hundreds of people, maybe thousands, to be honest. I worked in places where I was seeing like 12 patients a day. So over time, that definitely adds up, even if it's, many years ago that I was doing that. So I have a lot of experience working with people in larger bodies, hearing their stories, and being boots on the ground in the trenches with them, helping them with their goals. And my master's and my work now is in eating disorders. So I also have a lot of experience working in this field where pursuing weight loss is a disordered problem if you have an eating disorder and it is active, especially. I've worked with so many people who are trying to dismantle the idea that they need to lose weight in order to be healthy, happy, worthy of love, worthy of a high quality life. And I've worked with people of all different body sizes who are working through this. Eating disorders do not care how big or small you are. They affect people in all different bodies. All different eating disorders affect people in all different body sizes. And there's a huge misconception that in order to be anorexic, you have to be super thin. And in order to be like a binge eater, you have to be very large. It's just not true at all, from my experience. So I've also worked mostly since my weight loss days in the field where we really aren't pursuing intentional weight loss. Actually, we're actively trying not to pursue intentional weight loss for the sake of our health. I also have a lot of experience, obviously, in the sports nutrition world, working with athletes where weight sometimes is a topic where, hey, my coach said I have to lose weight, or I think in order to perform better, I should lose weight, or I gained weight and I feel a lot of pain now when I'm trying to be active, or hey, I actually have had eating disorders in the past because I'm not a lab rat in a vacuum. I'm a human with medical history who now happens to run, and I'm struggling with the idea of my weight and eating. So I have this perspective where I think a lot of my colleagues in this space, and I don't want to speak for them, but just a lot of what I've seen on the internet with similar, like intuitive eating accounts or eating disorder focused accounts or athletes, like athlete specific accounts, and sports nutrition specific accounts for endurance athletes, really don't like GLP-1s. And they really are loud about voicing this opinion. And I think if I did not have the experience that I have working with bariatric surgery patients, weight loss patients, people in larger bodies actively trying to pursue weight loss, and also the eating disorder training that I have, where I kind of have a really deep understanding of why society values thinness and how problematic this can be and how much harder it makes someone's life who is in a larger body. Um, I really think I could easily subscribe to that too and be like, yeah, I don't like these drugs because of XYZ that I'll get into. And yet, because I have that experience, I really have a more gray, middle ground, nuanced, it depends kind of approach. Any of you listening probably aren't maybe super surprised by that, since I love to hang out in that messy middle area. So I really want to get into this, just providing that background context to start. All right. So I'm not going to get into like GLP-1 medications, how they work, the science behind them. I did that in an episode with Jamie Mills, who is a weight loss dietitian, and she has a lot of personal experience with weight loss, and she exclusively works with women who are trying to pursue weight loss. And she does such a good job talking about this. So I did an episode with her a couple months ago. You can scroll back in the feed and definitely listen to that episode if you are open-minded and want to just learn more about these medications, whether it's for yourself, for your professional knowledge, or just to have it in your head so that when you see this in the wild, even if it's not something you're really considering, you just have maybe a more nuanced approach in how you think about it. Love that episode with Jamie. Go check it out. We also actually did an episode on weight loss surgery a couple months prior to the weight loss medication episode. So make sure you check that one out as well. And why I recorded those was I really, with Jamie specifically, is one, because she's fabulous, but two, because she brings the unique perspective of, hey, I'm a dietitian who's had weight loss surgery and who has used weight loss medications and who works with people all the time in this field. And I think that's so important to bring to the conversation. I really don't love seeing dietitians who have never had weight loss surgery, never taken a weight loss medication, never existed in a larger body, and don't work with people who do really talk about this topic in a supercharged way, because you don't have the experience and you don't have the perspective that I think you may want to think about gaining before you have such strong opinions. But polarizing stuff does really well on the internet, as I'm sure a lot of you know. So go check out those episodes if you want to learn more about that, and also just like the science behind how they actually work, because I think it's kind of cool and important and very not well understood by the general population. Because these medications have been around for a really long time. They've definitely experienced more of a boom lately, but we've been using them for a long time. So when it comes to, this topic, it's obviously very complex. So I kind of want to get into like some pros of using weight loss medications and also some cons, because that's what it comes down to with anything is, hey, here's the pros and cons, here's the research, here's the data, and you have to make the decision that's going to work for you with what you know about this and with your healthcare team who are helping you manage. I work with several clients now who are athletes who take weight loss medications. So again, good perspective to have. Not pro, not anti. It just depends. So some pros of GLP-1 medications. Some of the research that we have on some of them is solid. There's some solid research on, hey, this is beneficial for not only just like weight loss, but also metabolic health, managing chronic disease like diabetes, hyperlipidemia, hypertension, and that type of thing. Yeah, there's some solid research that this is a cool intervention. I think we could do with maybe more long-term research on like specific types of populations, because we don't necessarily have that yet. But I think that would be interesting. I mean, with any medication, we would love more of that. Especially, from my perspective, like, hey, can we do this on like some athletes taking these long-term? I think that'd be really interesting, because we just don't really have that yet. But the research we do have on more sedentary population, yeah, it's like solid. Blood sugar regulation, it can definitely help with this. This is kind of how a lot of these medications were first meant to be used. And now there's a really big misconception that I actually learned from my episode with Jamie, that people think if you're taking these drugs, it's just taking resources away from people with diabetes who are not using it for weight loss. And I think that's just not true. One, we've got different drugs with different labels for different uses so that basically supplies remain adequate for people with diabetes, people without diabetes, and people who are looking for diabetes management and weight loss. Um, so that's an argument that is just not accurate. So with blood sugar regulation, they're super helpful. Again, they're a therapeutic tool. They are certainly not and should not be the only therapeutic tool to help with managing any type of chronic disease. For some people, they're going to work really effectively, and it can be like their number one therapeutic tool that is just really, really helpful to help them move the mark. And for other people, they're not as effective. And that's like kind of what we need more research on. But just like nutrition, exercise, surgery, medication, it's a therapeutic tool. It doesn't and shouldn't be the only therapeutic tool. In fact, research shows it is going to be most effective when combined with other therapeutic tools, especially for long-term benefit when it comes to not just weight loss, but also like blood sugar regulation, management of other chronic disease. Another thing is that it is a way to manage obesity. So I'm putting this in the pro category. Obesity, if you are defining obesity as a chronic disease, it is a way to manage obesity. I don't really have a strong opinion on whether or not obesity should be considered a chronic disease, because I don't think with the science and the research that I've seen that we necessarily have a straight answer for that. I know some other professionals or humans in general may disagree with me. But just from working with actual humans, that's my perspective, because I see plenty of people who technically BMI wise are obese, are in a large body, who are super healthy. Like we kind of went through that list of how to know if you're fueling enough and how to know if like you're supporting your health basically by doing so. And like, yeah, they're checking off the marks. Like they're pretty damn healthy and they're in a larger body. And on the BMI scale, they're technically considered obese. Does that mean they have a chronic disease? I don't think so. I just think that means, hey, they're a larger human. I'm a smaller human. Both are allowed to exist in harmony. One should not be put on a pedestal versus another. We live in a very fat phobic society. 2, science, research does support that obesity in some people could be a chronic condition. And I think for me personally, the caveat of this is this person having other chronic disease as well? Like, are they not hitting a lot of the marks on the list of symptoms that I was talking about? They are struggling with maybe their labs. They're struggling with feeling good. They're struggling with the ability to exercise. Their vital signs are, abnormal. They have hypertension, or they have an elevated heart rate, or they have high blood sugars, or they have vitamin D deficiency. They have a thyroid problem. They have autoimmune disease. Again, humans are not lab rats in a vacuum. Sometimes they have other stuff going on. And I think if we see that weight loss can help those other symptoms and conditions improve long term, yeah, then maybe I think you can make an argument for the body size being a problem for that individual specifically. I do not think that should apply as a blanket statement, though, for all humans. Hopefully I'm making sense, but that's just kind of my 2 cents on that as a practitioner, where I don't think there's a concrete answer. I think when I was younger, I probably thought something different. And then I think as I was going through my own journey, I probably felt differently. But now I'm just kind of like, yeah, I don't know. I need more info on the person that we're talking about. I don't think we can really make blanket statements. So I'm putting it in the pro category because, hey, if weight loss helps you, get to the gym so that you can exercise, so that you can eat healthier, so that you can, manage your mental health better, so that you do feel better, so that your blood sugars do go down. Awesome. I think that's great. Another thing that I will say too, that I think I'm going to put in the pro category, I don't think it necessarily belongs in either category. It just kind of is what it is is that we live in a very fat phobic society. I mean, this could be like a whole podcast itself, not an episode, like an entire show that talks about this. Um, where people in larger bodies, yeah, they're going to have a harder time existing in our society because our society is set up for people in smaller bodies. It's set up to worship them more, to prioritize them more, to make chairs and seats and gym equipment and cars and airplane seats and all things, a small to fit smaller bodies better than larger bodies. It's so deeply entrenched in our culture. There's racism too at its core, where races that tend to have larger body compositions are looked down upon. So I think if you are someone who's living in that society and that speaks to you and you're feeling damn oppressed and like the underdog, the minority, and you're not feeling supported by society, and changing your body size makes you feel safe, accepted, given better opportunities. Who am I? Who am I to say that you shouldn't do that? Because we have research supporting this. We have research supporting people in smaller bodies get the job. People in smaller bodies get the promotion. People in smaller bodies get the opportunities because of how our society is. And there's not much I can do to change that because it's a very deep-rooted issue. So I'm going to keep trying to change it by maybe saying, hey, maybe we keep an open mind and understand that not all people in larger bodies are unhealthy. Not all people in larger bodies are bad humans. Not all people in larger bodies aren't deserving of love, just like all people in smaller bodies aren't healthy. Not all people in smaller bodies are good humans. Not all people in smaller bodies are, deserving of things. I think neutralizing that as much as possible is part of my work that I do. And I can recognize that, you got to weigh the pros and cons. You got to see what's going to make your life better long term, and you got to do what you feel like is best. That's what I'm going to say about that. So the idea that Serena Williams is getting a lot of attention, acceptance because she's in a smaller body and that's making her feel good, supported, safe, etc. Okay, good for her. She's definitely gotten, super problematic hate in the past because of her body size and because she has a lot of power and success as a woman, female Black athlete. And, if she can get her flowers a little bit more, I think that's great. But I do think it's a bummer she has to, change herself in order to do that if she didn't want to change herself in the first place. If she did, you do you, girl. So cons. Cons of GLP-1s. So what I have seen in practice and in research, obviously, is that, this can really drive home the idea that thinner is better and thinner is healthier and thinner is higher performing. When again, working with actual humans, I just know this isn't true. It's just not true, especially with athletes. I think one of the bummers about, high caliber athletes using a GLP-1 medication is because it can feed into the argument that thinner is better, faster, stronger, healthier, when we know that this isn't always true. Sometimes it is, but it's not always true. So I just think it's kind of a bummer that, it can feed into that argument that me and my colleagues are trying so hard to dismantle, because if we're always just trying to be thinner and then we have all of these symptoms I discussed earlier in the episode, we're not healthier, we're not faster, we're not stronger, and we're not feeling good. So coming at it from looking at many different markers of health and not just one anthropometric measurement being weight, I think is really important. People abuse the meds. They do, because they're so readily available. We have a lot of people abusing weight loss medications purely for aesthetic purposes. And again, sometimes you got to do what makes you feel good, what makes you feel safe, and who am I to judge? And it can make you unhealthier. It's not something that is going to be therapeutically beneficial, and can create more negative health outcomes. And when I'm approaching this as a healthcare provider, I'm always focused on the health outcomes. So that's just kind of the lens that I'm approaching this through. Especially because we've got a lot of like celebrities who have been in the spotlight, kind of taking these, becoming even thinner than they already were. and struggling. But it's being glamorized. It's kind of a way to basically reinstate the thin ideal and being like dominant over society and create and polarize more of that fat phobia that I was talking about. Is that always the case? Of course not. But I do think it's happening, just from what I see. Another issue is that there's not a ton of like eating disorder screening before prescribing these medications. There should be, but there's not, is what I'm seeing in practice. And some doctors absolutely do a better job at this than others. But from what I'm seeing is that the majority don't really screen for this. The majority of PCPs, like primary care physicians especially, don't necessarily feel confident screening for this. We've got research to back that up too, that a lot of doctors agree that eating disorders are a problem, but most of them do not feel confident screening for them. So this is a problem because basically, if you listen to previous episodes, how GLP-1s work is they do this is a super simple way of putting it, but they do decrease your appetite and take away some hunger cues. So this can be a huge problem, obviously, very triggering for eating disorders. Even if you don't know that you can be triggered or that you have the predisposition to have an eating disorder, this could be the thing that puts you over the edge. And eating disorders, let me remind you, do have a very high mortality rate. They're very serious mental health conditions. They are highly treatable. So if you do struggle with it, do not feel like I'm saying you're broken or that you're doomed, because you are certainly not broken. You are certainly not doomed. I'm right there with you. You can be a highly successful person with the best quality of life ever if you take your recovery seriously, you participate in effective treatment strategies, and you are consistent over time in managing this forever. And that being said, yeah, these meds can be a trigger for people, whether you have had an eating disorder, kind of history, and you know that about yourself. And I'm seeing people know that and kind of use the medication to exacerbate eating disorder behaviors, which is, a huge problem. And then I'm also seeing people who never really felt like they had a huge issue, or they were never formally diagnosed with anything, because that's really common, go on this medication to lose weight because they think I got to lose weight. And also, I want to lose weight. And also I didn't think I had an eating disorder because I was in a larger body, because I just was misinformed and did not know that. And then have some pretty serious, triggers happen from these medications just because of how they work. And that's hard. That's really hard to watch as a healthcare provider who works in the field. But again, if this has happened to you, you're in the right place because you're not broken, and we can definitely help you come out of that if you are needing and wanting that. The kind of second thing to go along with that's a con is there's just not a good amount of support. We see people going on these medications, and the only follow-up they're getting, if any, is from their doctor, once or twice a year. And it's basically like, how you doing? You losing weight? Yeah. Okay, cool. Good job. Or no, let's up the dose, or let's change what we're doing. And it's not the detailed amount of nutrition support from a qualified nutrition professional, being a dietitian. Since this is a medical intervention, it should absolutely be coming from a dietitian. Anything else would be not super legal. So we're not seeing a lot of that support, and that support is so key. It's so key. It's key to long-term success of the medication working. If it's something that your pros outweigh your cons and this is working well for you, the nutrition support is so needed. We can't just not do the foundational stuff of having solid lifestyle, nutrition, and exercise habits and expect the medication to work 100% long-term. And we're going to have a lot less negative side effects if those things are also in place. And they're just not part of the standard of practice right now. Unfortunately, I think, again, some places do better with this than others, but I, for the majority of the time, see there's just no support. And the person seeking like me out several months in, or even several years in, to kind of do it themselves and pay out of pocket, which again is great. That's what we're here for, but it really should be built in better, because we'd be seeing a lot better, long-term outcomes of this, I think. if that was the case. And this is not me saying you don't need the medication, just diet and exercise. That's not what I'm saying. Because again, I have a very nuanced approach to this. I don't believe that is going to be the most effective therapeutic tool for everyone on its own. Just like I don't believe only using the medication on its own is going to be the most therapeutic tool that's effective. We want to combine them. We want to combine them. So something that nutrition support can really be helpful with is one, identifying if you're eating enough, because this medication is going to make it damn hard for you to eat enough, especially as an athlete, because of how it blunts the appetite. If you do have more of an eating disorder history, or I'm sorry, I just got a news statement that says Taylor Swift is engaged. I'm gonna have to leave and come back. Okay, I'm back. I'm back. Wow, my phone was blowing up, and then I got a news like thing. Yeah, Taylor Swift's engaged. That's cool. When you're listening to this later, you're probably gonna be like, "Wow, Holly, that was a month ago." Um, wow. Okay. Anyway, so the other thing that can be really helpful in terms of having nutrition support when you're taking this medication is that one, we can kind of identify if you're eating enough, if any of these symptoms are coming up, and how to help you do that, because it's not going to be very intuitive with the medication because of how it blunts your appetite. We're also going to be able to help identify if this is triggering some eating disorder stuff for you, if that's a concern, or maybe it's just not something you were super aware of. That's going to be really helpful and really important too. And three, for athletes specifically, we can help you implement the sports nutrition stuff that, again, is already not super intuitive, even if you're not taking a weight loss medication that blunts your appetite, but is going to be even less intuitive if you are. So that's all going to be really, really helpful. We can also help monitor blood work because, again, pretty much this is not happening. This is not built in as support. And it's just kind of like, oh, you didn't monitor any of this. And now it's been a year into taking this medication and you have all the symptoms that I listed at the beginning of this episode. Oops. Okay. Now we have to dig you out of a hole, and that takes a lot longer. So if we can help you not get into the hole in the first place, that would be helpful, right? So that's definitely a con because that's not happening. So if you can get that to happen, probably going to have more success overall with your goals. They're expensive, so that's definitely a con. They're not always expensive. Again, this is just going to vary a lot, but from what I've seen, heard, had clients experience on the episode with Jamie too, we talked about this, is that right now it's not really super well regulated. Price gouging is a thing. Medications can be super expensive, and this is meant to be taken long term. So it is a financial investment over time. And what I see a lot is people go on them, they don't get nutrition support, they end up in a hole with all these symptoms and all of these other health issues. Maybe they lost weight, but they're not healthier. And then their insurance stops covering the medication, or their job changes, or whatever happens where they can no longer take this medication, or they are no longer taking this medication because they have all these other health issues. And now they're going to have to invest even more money in helping themselves dig out of a hole. That sucks. That sucks to hear about. That sucks to watch. Again, we're happy to help you. That's what we're here for. And you're not doomed. You're going to be okay. But it's definitely on the cons list. They're expensive. They're not cheap. And it is meant to be more lifelong. So that's a con. Another thing too is that, again, in athlete culture, what worries me and a lot of my colleagues is that endurance athletes specifically are going to hear, I can just take this medication and lose 10 pounds, keep doing what I'm doing nutritionally and performance wise, and be faster, because that does happen a lot. You can lose some weight and get faster initially, and then almost always later, we experience all these symptoms, bone injuries, catastrophic things that happen in people's careers, and that takes a really long time to come back from. So we're just worried about that. We're worried people are going to get on the weight loss medication kind of train to lose weight, for that short-term success when it's setting them up for long-term failure. And it's not good for just sport culture as a whole. So that's kind of just some thoughts, some updates. We got a Taylor Swift engagement announcement during this episode. So I'm going to go run around my driveway and scream at the birds. But I hope this was helpful, informative, maybe gave you some food for thought. Again, if you are wanting extra support with your nutrition, whether you're taking a GLP-1 or not, you want to take one, you never want to take one, you're just an athlete, maybe working on your fueling, whatever it is you need support with, we're here to help. You can check out how to work with us at the link in the show notes. And until next time, happy running and happy fueling.